Okay, calm down. You got rivers, man. You got rivers, man. Okay, calm down.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Katie Halper Show. We got a great show for you. I feel like we do that like every week, honestly. And I'm not bragging. I'm bragging about the guests. I'm not bragging about myself. And we do really have another wonderful show for you. What can I say? We have joining us during the second half, former CIA analyst Ray McGovern. But during the first half, we have the wonderful Assal Rad, who is a scholar and also a really great media analyst. But before we start, I would just like everyone to take a moment to give this a thumbs up. This is how you help the algorithm, which we obviously have to fight back against a lot of suppression, especially since we cover certain topics that are considered controversial or worthy of suppression or censorship. So give it a thumbs up. Also subscribe, and to subscribe, you hit subscribe and then you hit the bell. That is so you don't miss any streams, because we are doing additional streams, especially lately, especially given how much news is coming out of Iran. We've been doing these extra streams with people who are based there, like Dr. Mohammed Marandi, and we're going to continue doing that probably. So you definitely don't want to miss out on these more international, I wouldn't say internationally themed, because this show is very internationally themed, but get where the guests are more international, because given the time zone that we're in, it's not that conducive or consistent with people who are in Europe or the Middle East. But anyway, enough about that. Please do subscribe. Also, if you can, please do become Patreon supporters. That's patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. Again, patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. You get great bonus content. For instance, for last week, you have an amazing extended interview with the very smart, but also pretty hilarious Max Blumenthal. So again, you can find that at patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. You have other goodies that you get access to, and we're going to just keep dropping more and more Patreons. Okay, so I'm going to bring on our first guest. We are so excited to have her back on. Dr. Assal Rad is a scholar of Middle East history and non-resident fellow at the Arab Center, Washington, D.C. She works on research and writing related to U.S. foreign policy issues, the Middle East, and contemporary Iran. She completed a PhD in history from the University of California, Irvine, and is the author of The State of Resistance, Politics, Culture, and Identity in Modern Iran. So welcome, Assal. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me back.
Of course. So there's so much to talk about right now. Honestly, you know, there's genocide in Gaza. There's saber rattling when it comes to Iran. And I have specific questions for you, but I'm wondering, as someone who doesn't just study current events and also history, but media analysis, if you think there are any stories that we should talk about that the media is neglecting or distorting.
Well, I would say one story that is kind of shocking to me that they're not really covering is the fact that babies in Gaza are being starved to death because Israel is blocking baby formula. And this has now been ongoing. The stories started to emerge a little bit about a week ago, but there's basically barely any coverage. And when you juxtapose the fact that babies are being starved to death with, you know, chants at music festivals that we don't like, it's insane that that is getting so much coverage, and the fact that Israel is starving babies is not.
Yeah, that's really important. And in fact, let's jump ahead to this, because people probably know this, that you're referring to. Okay, this is embarrassing. Is the name Bobby Vylan? What do you know?
I don't actually. Same. I don't know how it's pronounced.
Okay. So some young people in the chat, please tell us how to pronounce it. Bobby Vylan or Villain. We'll just say Bobby. So Bobby, there was a performance at Glastonbury, and the irony is that Kneecap, this great Irish rap duo, they were performing at Glastonbury as well. And BBC decided not to stream them, not to broadcast them, because they've said things that are critical of Israel. And also they have a real sense of solidarity with the people of Palestine, which makes sense for if you're an Irish person, not from the Protestant side. It makes a lot of sense, right? Because they're very familiar with colonialism in a very direct way, and oppression and disenfranchisement. So what happened was they did not stream Kneecap, but instead they did stream Bobby Vylan. And there were chants of free Palestine, and more specifically, and I'm not going to say the word out loud because I don't want us to get kicked off of YouTube. They were chanting DEATH to the IDF, and there was also back and forth between them and the people in the crowd, going back and forth. And so this has led to a criminal investigation against them, denunciations from across the spectrum, even their visas to the U.S. being revoked. Kneecap's Glastonbury set is also being investigated by the police, and their visas to the U.S. Are revoked as well. The Bob Vylan's talent agency, United Talent Agency, dropped them. And, this is just yet another example of censorship. But I think it's so rich, as you point out, Assal, that people are more upset about chants about doing something to an army than they are about the actual death and actual killing and actual genocide that is being carried out.
Well, you can also, if chanting something of that nature is what we're deciding is problematic, then it's interesting to me that every year Israelis gather for Flag Day to celebrate the illegal occupation of East Jerusalem, and in doing so, chant death to Arabs, not death to Hamas, not
Right.
death to, obviously Palestinians are not allowed to have a military. So if
Right.
the Palestinians had a military, not death to an entity that is carrying out some kind of violence, or in this case, for the chant that we were talking about, genocide, but death to an entire ethnic group. That never gets, there are no visa revocations. There's no investigations. There's no outcry. There's no outrage. It's a yearly like ceremony. Palestinians are cleared by Israeli security forces off of their own land so that Israelis can come and chant death to Arabs. And that's never something that's particularly, that has sparked this kind of hysteria or outrage. So again, repeatedly, we see the difference between what lives are valued and what lives are not.
Right. Another point is related to this is how Zohran Mamdani, obviously, who just won the primary, and now we know he won even more than we thought because they're counting more ballots. He has been asked time and time again to condemn the call to globalize the intifada. Now, I just want to explain that he never said that. He was just asked about it on the Bulwark podcast because people love taking the most radical example of something that any random person has said who supports a free Palestine and asking every single other person who supports a free Palestine to disavow that statement or condemn it. You never hear people asked to condemn or disavow the statements like death to Arabs. Nobody is asked that by the media. And I just want to actually show a video because you mentioned the violent videos that people never try to get people in trouble for. So this is a video that Israeli journalist Yinon Magal posted, and it shows Israeli soldiers singing and chanting for the occupation of Gaza and to, quote, wipe off the seed of Amalek, saying there are, quote, no innocent civilians, end quote, in Gaza. So they want to wipe off the seed of Amalek and that there are no innocent civilians in Gaza. And this is a reference, Amalek is a reference to the Old Testament and how you are supposed to kill every man, woman, child, not just man, woman, and child, but also animals, livestock. And this is, of course, something that Netanyahu himself talked about Amalek. So let's take a look at this video. It has subtitles. I'm coming to occupy Gaza and beat Hezbollah. I stick by one mitzvah, that's like a good deed, to wipe off the seed of Amalek. I left home behind me, won't come back until victory. We know our slogan. There are no uninvolved civilians. Okay, so I think you get the point. But yeah, as you pointed out, Assal, the double standards are stunning. And you also, I just want to share because everyone should be following Assal on Twitter because she does really great media analysis, often just like in the form of visual tweets. But here you did, which one was? Oh, yeah, you have a tweet where you just literally compared what happened to Bobby Vylan with Bibi in the halls of the U.S. government. Let's just take a look at that. So you tweeted out, but a wanted. So you quote tweet breaking. Bob Vylan have had their visas, U.S. visas revoked. I got over their quote hateful tirade at Glastonbury. A Trump official has said, and then you. On top of that, right, but a wanted genocidal war criminal is greeted by our representatives like a hero. And there he is in the halls of Congress in the United States, surrounded. He's in a sea of clapping members of the U.S. government, bipartisan. You got Republicans and Democrats. You got McConnell. You got that guy, Brad. I can't remember his last name, but awful. And I point him out because he's a Democrat.
Sure.
What'd you say? Sherman. Yes, it's Brad Sherman. Thank you. Yeah. So yes, I think that, it is a stunning double standard. And what do you make of this?
I mean, it's a continuation of, if you're looking at the U.S. response to it and the fact that, you actually have visas being revoked. It's a continuation of full U.S. support for Israel genocide in Gaza. And we saw this, that picture of Netanyahu was actually from last year. It was the Biden administration. So there's continuity between the Democrats and the Republicans and the Biden admin and the current administration in terms of just absolute full support for anything that Israel does, which includes, invading countries, bombing sovereign countries, occupying land, apartheid, all of these things, but then the largest issue currently being a genocide in Gaza. So there's Netanyahu has ICC arrest warrants against him. He's a wanted war criminal. And yet there's no question as to whether or not the US would welcome Netanyahu. But then if you have someone who is engaged in no actual violence, right? It's the idea that it's inciting violence or it's the conduct is inappropriate. It also speaks to our free speech principles, the fact that, we've already seen those being eroded, starting with the Biden admin and now moving forward very, very aggressively under this administration. It's just that repeatedly you see that in the Western narrative, whether it's the way that the media describes it, whether it's the way our politicians talk about it, Palestinian lives, Arab lives, Muslim lives do not matter. And the only lives in this particular situation that do are Israelis. And I don't know. It's hard to wrap your mind. That has to be the logic to a genocide, right? The logic of a genocide is that you take a group of people and based on their religion or ethnicity, they are being slaughtered. And we're seeing that happen every day.
Right. I also wanted to point out, this is just kind of interesting. Obviously, I agree with every single thing that you just said. But just going back to the Bobby Vylan thing for a second, I do think it's interesting that the media has focused. Understandably, it's kind of more of a attention-getting thing that they chanted. But I thought it's worth watching a longer, kind of astute speech on the matter. So here's what Bob Vylan had to say, and let's just take a look at this video.
So yeah, man. Obviously, we're seeing some fucked up things happening in the world, and. We're seeing the UK and the US be complicit in war crimes and genocide happening over there to the Palestinian people. And I know we're on the BBC, look, we're not going to say anything crazy, all right? Don't leave that for them lads. You know what I mean? But we have seen, unfortunately, we have seen a strange reaction to people that come out and voice support for Palestine, even though anybody with any kind of moral compass can surely tell that what is happening over there in Gaza is a tragedy. So look, We're not pacifist punks here over at Bob Vylan Enterprises. We're not pacifist punks. We are the violent punks, because sometimes you got to get your message across with violence, because that is the only language that some people speak, unfortunately. This next song, we want to dedicate it to every single band that is using their platform to speak up for the Palestinian people and speak against the crimes that Israel, the UK, and the US, and much of the Western world are complicit in. So this is for all of you, like this is for Murder Capital, this is for Kneecap, this is for Amel and the Sniffers. Every single band out there using their platform to speak up for the Palestinian people. Because we must pray, hope, and wish to see a day where the Palestinian people are liberated and free from the tyranny of the Israeli government. Free, free! Free, free! Free, free! Free, free! Free, free! Free Palestine each and every single time this is pretty songs.
Okay, so I just wanted to show that, since that's not getting a lot of attention. Also, it is Vylan. I think I was they've been so vilified that I was loath to call them Bobby Vylan, but okay, it is Vylan. Not only did I know because of that video, but I also got a message from someone, so I was about to correct myself anyway. But yeah, as you point out, you know, this is what people are up in arms about, not about it's discourse from people defending Palestinians from genocide. It's not the actual genocide. Yeah.
People are up in arms about this, but not the actual genocide. They're not up in arms. I mean, or I should say, the people who are up in arms about this are the people who are not up in arms about genocide. Because even if you look at, if you look at the majority of the world is against what Israel is doing, that's clear. Look at how states in the UN have been voting, whether it's the General Assembly or in other situations. Look at the rhetoric that you hear from leaders that are not necessarily from the West, and even some Western leaders. But also look at the polling in a country like the United States, which is highly, highly propagandized. I mean, the US is basically whether it's the political discourse, whether it's the media discourse, whether it's popular culture, it is built around the idea that it's a zealous kind of, they say it themselves, it's unconditional support for Israel. That phrase has been normalized, even though it's extremely abnormal to say that you unconditionally support any state in this world. There should be conditions, because there are legal conditions to the US supporting a state. There are domestic US laws that say you can't provide military aid or arms to a country that is committing gross human rights violations. So it's always conditional. But they've normalized this kind of, extremist language to the point that no one questions it. And despite all of that, you see a massive shift in US public opinion about Israel. Why? Because people have eyes, because they've been seeing atrocity after atrocity every single day for 21 straight months, and they're being told not to believe their eyes, not to believe their ears, and to believe that children are somehow the enemy. They're no longer innocent. And it's not that Palestinian men and women are not also innocent, because they are. And it's important to make that point. Why is the focus so much on children? Because there's no way of making an argument, a ridiculous argument that Israel will make, that everyone is a combatant. Children are not combatants. Infants not getting baby formula, they're not combatants. So there's no way to make that argument in that case.
Right. Like, they always lie about that, but let's say for argument's sake that these people are combatants or quote unquote terrorists, right? Obviously they can't claim that about children. So it's an important thing to point out. Also, I think that it's pretty rich that people, again, who made up things about babies being beheaded by Hamas on October 7th ignore what is actually happening to babies right now. And it's also ironic because that was one of the lies that they tried to use to get into the Iraq War. The second one was that Saddam Hussein was removing Kuwaiti babies from incubators. It wasn't true, but I just think it's funny that is such a terrible thing that they used it as atrocity propaganda. And yet when Israel actually does let babies on incubators die, and as you mentioned, also does tons of other things like starves them, people think that that's, somehow okay.
Well, since you said atrocity propaganda, I think this is an important point because these two things go together. Atrocity propaganda is the flip side of whitewashing propaganda. So
Right.
what Western media does is, on one hand, it creates exactly what you're talking about, this atrocity propaganda that tries to incite, deep anger and hatred in order to justify the atrocities that Israel was going to carry out and has carried out. And the flip side of that is, when Israel is the one actually carrying out atrocities, real ones, then that is whitewashed. You either don't report it, you underreport it, you maybe publish an article about it, but it's convoluted, and you try to justify it by saying, well, they were targeting Hamas, but they accidentally killed 50 children in this particular strike. So those two things go together, because ultimately the goal, it's not about the actions. The goal is to justify whatever Israel does because Israel is the one doing it, not because the actions themselves are being judged.
Right. And you just mentioned a couple minutes ago how they're portraying everyone who they can claim as a combatant, right, to justify what they're doing. But the irony is that, under international law, you actually can be you can engage in armed resistance against your occupier, and Israel is the occupier, right? So somehow it's okay when Israel commits war crimes, but when Palestinians engage in armed struggle that is actually allowed under international humanitarian law, they're criminalized.
Well, you imagine going to Israel's attacks on Iran.
Yeah.
You're no longer talking about an occupied population. They're two sovereign states. Iran, I don't think anybody would argue at this point, is a sovereign recognized state, and international law applies to all states the same way.
Right.
When Israel attacked Iran and Iran retaliated for those attacks, somehow Iran's retaliation is not justified as self-defense.
Right.
Israel can retaliate against October 7th by carrying out a genocide, and there's no limitation to what it can do. Everything is justified based on the notion that it's a retaliation. A sovereign state retaliating to Israel's attacks, still it's Israel acting in self-defense, and Iran is the country that's condemned. I mean, it's wild when you look at it. And I think more and more, and this is why public opinion is shifting, I think more and more people are seeing things for what they are. I mean, it is insane to repeatedly use the sentence, Israel has the right to self-defense, as if no one else does. Nobody has the right to self-defense, except that's not a right. That's not a right. That's an exception.
Right. Yeah. And also, how does starving babies constitute self-defense? How does dressing up in women's lingerie after you ethnically cleanse them, at the very least, who knows what they've done, probably in many cases worse things, but we know at least they've evicted them from their houses and homes, bombed them. How is that self-defense? I mean, that's just sadism.
I mean, because when there's a society that's completely unchecked, when basically you can act with impunity, and this has now been going on for decades. That's the context to understand as well, is this isn't, they say it didn't start on October 7th because obviously it didn't. The Western narrative doesn't want you to talk about anything before October 7th, because you would have to talk about the fact that Israel's occupation is decades long, that their actions in the West Bank are consistent with apartheid, that settlements continue to expand, that there's been a blockade on Gaza for over a decade. Like, all of these things were going on. Palestinians were being killed, repressed, not represented in any way by an occupying force for decades. But you would actually have to address, again, Israel's actions, and that's just not something that we do. We don't talk about Israel's actions. But you hear, another way that propaganda works is you repeat something so often that it becomes ingrained in people's minds and they no longer question the logic. So everybody has heard phrases like, Israel has the right to exist. You never hear, and no other state have a right to exist. You never hear that.
Sorry, I cut you off. Keep going.
No, and I was going to say it's the same thing. Israel has the right to self-defense. They say it over and over again. You never question the fact that apparently nobody else has the right to self-defense. And these are the tactics that are used to make people internalize and believe truths that, when scrutinized even a little bit, are not really truths.
Right. Also, this right to exist, states don't have a right to exist. I mean, we've seen this with the Zohran Mamdani discussion also. People have rights, and states have the obligation to protect the rights of people. But it's a brilliant talking point. It really is, because it makes people who won't say that a state has a right to exist, they're like applying rights that belong to people to states. So it makes you sound like you're like a bad guy or like reactionary or don't believe in rights. But of course, what you're doing is it's being used to defend an ethno-state, ethno-nationalism, which is pretty ironic. So we're going to shift to Iran shortly. But before that, I just want to show one example of the media bias that you do such a great job capturing. So recently, there was a beachside cafe in Gaza that was used by journalists searching for internet. It was bombed, killing, reports vary, but killing at least 33 to 39 people. And you did one of your classic headline corrections. So this time looking at the way the New York Times portrayed these attacks. So let's take a look. You did two posts on this. So the first one, here's the, and you wrote fixed it, because you often do fix the headlines from these, media journalists, quote unquote, which are really just like stenographers for Israel. Or for the United States government. So the headline read, Gaza City Cafe hit by deadly strike. And you fixed it by saying Gaza City Cafe hit by Israeli deadly strike, kills at least 30 Palestinians. Now, you gave the New York Times a chance, right? Because then they updated their headline. Let's see what this one looked like. Gaza's deadly strike levels popular seaside cafe in Gaza. And as you point out, here's the updated version. 2 chances, and the New York Times failed to mention Israel in both. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's just like a repeated pattern. The New York Times is especially bad with this. I will say I have noticed that other outlets they still do this sometimes, but there's more attribution. I mean, early on, it was like nobody was attributing what was happening to Israel. But overall, that picture still exists. And overall, you see the whitewashing of Israel's crimes, especially, for instance, like starvation. The way that starvation is framed, if you look at the way that the Western media frames it, you would think that you're talking about a natural disaster. Like people are just starving, they're having difficulty finding food, they're
famine. Like
that's not the case. The food is sitting at the border. There's tons of it. It's just not being allowed in by Israel. So it's a man-made catastrophe. It's a man-made famine, and it's made by Israel. And that's the thing that's often, missing from the story. But yeah, I mean, the New York Times is just probably one of the worst. And when you think about its reputation as this paper of record, that's what makes it so much worse. And we know, by the way, there was a leaked memo. I think some people may have forgotten about this. The Intercept wrote about this over a year ago. There was a leaked memo from the New York Times that specifically said, don't use these words. Don't use words like genocide or
Palestine. Yeah.
Refugee camp. You'll notice they never say refugee camp. They'll never say refugees were bombed, displaced people or people, a school turned shelter was struck, because they don't want to use phrases like refugee camps. They don't want to say Israel is bombing refugees. And so that gets repeatedly done. And we know very clearly it's intentional.
Right. Yeah, really. I mean, absolutely revolting. So shifting gears to Iran, what have you made of the media's coverage of what some, such as Trump, have called the 12-day war?
I mean, not surprisingly terrible. So starting out from the very beginning, the way that the headlines framed Israel's attacks, there was you didn't hear language like, sovereignty, violation, international law, anything that would indicate Israel did something wrong. What you saw was the language of preemptive strikes. And for anybody who is old enough to remember the lead up to the invasion of Iraq in 2003, it was precisely the same, not only the same kind of language, but the same excuse, right? Iraq in 2003, the US carried out preemptive attacks because of weapons of mass destruction, which we all now know was a total fabrication and lie. It was made up to justify an illegal invasion of a sovereign country, regardless of what you think about the leadership. Yeah. And the thing about that is the irony of the 2003 Iraq war is while the Bush administration was criticizing Saddam Hussein for actions that he took in the 1980s, he was leaving out the part where the US is the one that supported him and provided him the weapons in the 80s to do it. So, you know, there's always a justification for whatever our plan is. So then you saw that here. You saw preemptive strikes. Now, what does preemptive mean? It means there's an imminent threat. There was no question. The media didn't challenge this notion at all. Like, where was there any evidence that there was an imminent threat from Iran or that Iran was going to carry out an attack on Israel? Every attack that we saw, for instance, last year that Iran carried out on Israel was a retaliation for an Israeli attack. It's Israel that bombed a Iranian consulate in Damascus. Iran responded. It's Israel that carried out an assassination of Hania in Tehran. Iran, in fact, in that situation, Iran waited 2 months. They didn't respond because the Biden admin at the time was saying, well, we're working on a ceasefire, so nobody should undermine the ceasefire. 2 months later, when Israel invaded Lebanon, that's when Iran retaliated, saying, well, clearly there is no ceasefire and they've actually started a new war. So that's precisely what we saw here. So first you get preemptive, this language of preemptive, without question. Then when Iran responds, the word retaliation is not used. They're not retaliatory strikes. Iran attacks a barrage of missiles. Iranian missiles attack Israel, as if Israel is just sitting there quietly and Iran decided to randomly attack Israel. And it's not in retaliation for attacks that from the very beginning, from the first day that Israel carried them out, killed Iranian civilians and targeted civilian infrastructure, like apartment buildings. Entire apartment buildings came crashing down in Tehran. No reflection on, no headlines about Iranian civilians that were killed. Right. So again, the total dehumanization of every people in the region, whether they're Persians, Turks, Muslims, Arabs, it doesn't matter. It's just everyone is dehumanized as long as it serves Israel's expansionist, genocidal agenda.
Right. Well, you know, I wanted to ask you, because your book, The State of Resistance, Politics, Culture, and Identity in Modern Iran, has a whole chapter on the Pahlavi Dynasty and its brand of Iranian nationalism. So I'm going to ask you to respond to a video of Reza Pahlavi. But first, can you just set up who this person is, what the dynasty was, and you know, what a lot of people talk about Iranian monarchists, what this means?
So Iran was based, I mean, like most historic countries or empires, Iran was a monarchy until 1979. In 1979, and with multiple dynasties, and we're talking about, you know, 2,500 years of, if you go all the way back to the Persian Empire, with various empires of different peoples. But the style of governance was usually a monarchy. And so the last dynasty the last monarchic dynasty in Iran was the Pahlavi Dynasty that was established basically in the 1920s and then fell in 1979 after the Iranian Revolution, which very briefly, I'll just say the Iranian Revolution was brought together people across the political spectrum in Iranian society. But what came after the revolution was one group, the sort of Islamist branch led by Ayatollah Khomeini, that in sort of post-revolutionary vying for power, appropriated power for themselves, eventually creating the Islamic Republic. But that wasn't the initial goal of the revolution, so to speak. You had these disparate groups that didn't have a lot of political commonality. Their only common goal was to overthrow the monarchy, which they did. And so Reza Pahlavi, the clip I'm assuming you're going to show, is the son of the deposed Shah, who actually left Iran before the revolution in 1978, and obviously has not been back since.
Right. So here, as you predicted, is a speech by Reza Pahlavi given in Paris on June 23rd. So let's take a listen.
Today, it is clearer than ever. The Islamic Republic is collapsing. Credible reports indicate that Ali Khamenei's family and the family of senior regime officials are making preparations to flee Iran. The regime is on its last legs in towns and cities across the country. The military is fractured. The people are united. The foundation of this 46-year tyranny are shaking. This is our Berlin Wall moment. But like all moments of great change, it comes fraught with danger. We stand at a crossroads. One road leads to bloodshed and chaos, the other to a peaceful and democratic transition. The difference in these two roads depends on one factor, and one factor alone: whether the current regime in Iran is allowed to survive. If the West throws the regime a lifeline, there will be more bloodshed and chaos, because this regime will not submit or surrender after it has been humiliated. It will lash out. As long as it is in power, no country and no people are safe, whether on the streets of Washington, Paris, Jerusalem, Riyadh, or Tehran. There is only one way to achieve peace: a secular, democratic Iran. I am here today to submit myself to my compatriots, to lead them down this road of peace and democratic transition.
Wow, what a generous guy. So what are your thoughts on what Reza's saying here?
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack, and let's start with the fact that he has been saying that the Islamic Republic is on the verge of collapse since the 1980s. Just to clarify, since the 1980s, he has been saying the Islamic Republic is on the verge of collapse. Now, I'm not saying that the Islamic Republic will never collapse. I'm sure most states and most governments will eventually, in one way or another. But if you've been predicting it for 40 years, I don't know that you're reading the room correctly always. So there's that. There's the fact that he always says that. The idea that officials are, fleeing, that every time you see large protests in Iran, that statement has been made. And it has not happened. It doesn't mean it won't happen ever, but it has not happened. And the reason I point this out is the credibility of someone who speaks in such a matter-of-fact fashion, but has repeatedly made similar statements, and none of those things came to pass. So it questions his credibility. The other things that would question his credibility. It is a point of irony that you talk about a secular democratic country, but appoint yourself with no popular mandate, right? Who in Iran, because there's a distinction between the Iranian diaspora, people who are outside of the country, and the people inside of the country. It assumes that in a country of 90 million people, no one is well suited for a transition besides someone whose only qualification is that he is the son of a deposed former king. That's his only qualification, right? I would love someone to give me another qualification. I would love someone to tell me what his job has been for the last 46 years, because nobody knows. Nobody knows what his occupation is, which begs the question, how has he paid for his life? Because what will be argued is that the royal family took much of the country's wealth, and that's how they've been able to live outside of the country for all of these decades without actually having to have a job. I mean, if you want to run a country, what is your resume to do that? What experience do you have? Have you run for local office where you are in the United States? None of these things exist. So again, this speaks to a question of credibility. There's another irony, which is his father, in 1953, when Iran's democratization movement had really reached a sort of zenith where you had the parliament and a prime minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, that was actually enforcing the constitution. He had nationalized Iranian oil, which made him a very popular figure nationally. When there was a sort of competition over power between him and the Shah, who is the father of the person we just watched, it was the US and the British that overthrew through a coup, that democratization movement, the prime minister, and reinstated the Shah after which he became really like a very despotic and brutal leader, which is what led decades later to the revolution. I mean, there's this idea, there's this romanticizing of that history, but it fails to represent the fact that the country actually had a revolution because people were obviously dissatisfied with what existed. Now, they can be dissatisfied with what came afterwards, but two things can be bad at the same time. Those things can simultaneously be the case. So there's that. But the last thing that I would say about this video, and what he represents, that I think is highly, highly, highly problematic. And in many ways, I think even within some of the diaspora and some people within Iran, he may have lost a little bit of credibility, is that he supported Iran being bombed. He supported a war on Iran. And for the longest time, those of us who were proponents of diplomacy that said there is a way of avoiding war, and if we don't do these things, if we don't go the diplomatic path, then eventually there'll be some kind of military confrontation between these countries. Those who argued against that said that they weren't for war either. And yet here he is, clearly favoring a foreign intervention into the country to overthrow the government and install himself, which is just, like I said, sort of bizarre to the notion of a democratic process. Or why someone who has not been connected to the country for so many years, I mean, you left when you were 17, you're now like a 65-year-old man. How are you connected to what that society now looks like? And it sort of undermines the idea that there are, I mean, think about the political activists, the political movements we've seen in Iran, the protest movements we've seen, human rights activists, lawyers, all of these activists across Iranian society who have been arrested, who have suffered under the repression of the Islamic Republic. None of those people are legitimate figures who actually have bled for that nation and know it better because they exist in that system. So it's a very odd kind of situation. Sorry, last point. You cannot feign concern for human rights in Iran or anywhere in this world when you have no problem with a genocide, which you don't, because if you are supporting a genocidal state bombing your country, that is support for that genocide as well. And to be completely silent on the worst atrocities we have seen in this century, I think is the most damning evidence that undermines the credibility of such a figure.
Well, it's interesting that you brought that up because I actually want to show a clip next and have you react to it. It's another Reza clip. And here he is on the BBC. And here, take a listen to what he has to say about the Israeli attacks on Iran.
Are you actually saying then that Israel bombing your country, civilians in Iran being killed, is a positive thing?
I'm not saying that the targeting was meant to hurt the Iranian people. The targeting was meant to basically neutralize the regime threat. Clearly, I don't think that it was an intention of the Israeli government to attack Iranian civilians.
I mean, clearly, when do they attack civilians? That's so not their lane, right? I mean, remember that when they first attacked a hospital and the talking point was Israel would never attack a hospital? Then they moved the goalposts, obviously, because it's, 36 hospitals later?
So see, that's precisely actually the kinds of clips or the kinds of messaging that I'm talking about when I say you're to make that statement after Israel has killed, I mean, minimally 56,000 people in Gaza. And everybody knows, I mean, there's Lancet articles and research and all sorts of very smart people who know that is not the real death toll. That's just what that's how many names the Gaza Health Ministry can come up with so far. You have thousands of people who are buried, thousands of people who are missing, the secondary effects of all of the destruction and damage that has been done, the system, the healthcare system collapsing. I mean, not only that, but then Israel killed thousands of civilians in Lebanon. Israel killed within just a few days, hundreds of civilians in Iran. So to make that statement isn't just to whitewash Israel's crimes in Iran, which are real, but much, much worse, it's to whitewash Israel's genocide, because you're basically laundering the idea that this isn't a state that would ever harm civilians. Of course it is. We're seeing them, not only are we seeing them harm civilians, we're seeing the Israeli military boast. We're seeing members of the military boast about the idea that they do it. The video that you showed earlier, I mean, singing songs about there's no one innocent. You have from the very top, the prime minister of the country, all the way down into the the media and other representatives of Israeli society, openly using genocidal language while a genocide is being committed. And then to have a figure come in, and a figure that has sort of used his platform to rightfully criticize the grievances Iranians have towards the Islamic Republic, but then justify Israel's actions in the process. You can criticize both. I've never understood why people have a difficulty doing this. You can criticize both. You can criticize even more than them. You can criticize the Israeli government, the American government, the Iranian government, the Russian government. I mean, you can criticize most governments in the world. So it's not, but that's not what he's doing. And so I think that speaks again to the credibility.
Or lack thereof, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
We are going to bring on our next guest shortly but I'm going to have Assal, if you don't mind, I want to have you and our next guest on, because I have a clip for you guys to react to of Marco Rubio, and I think both of you will bring really important perspective on this. But guys, before I bring on Ray McGovern, or before I play this clip, I just want to tell people we got great numbers right now. We got 1,272 people watching, but we only have 619 likes, and I assume more than half of you like this are not hate watching. Okay. So I want to see by the end of this next clip, we better get those numbers up. We're at 627. I want to see, I mean, I should be demanding 1,000, but I'll let us get to 800. Okay. So, but first, and of course, Assal, this has been really great, and thank you. And I'm going to hold you for one more second.
Sure. Speaking
of Iranian hostages, the Iran hostage crisis, I'm going to bring on the great Ray McGovern, who is a former CIA analyst turned activist. He headed the CIA branch analyzing Russian foreign policy in the 70s. From 1981 to 85, he presented in person the early morning briefings of the president's daily brief. He was awarded the Intelligence Commendation Medallion at retirement. In an act of conscience in early 2006, Ray returned the medallion, explaining, quote, "I do not want to be associated, however remotely, with an agency engaged in torture." In January 2003, 2 months before the U.S. attacked Iraq, he co-founded Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity to warn the president that the quote-unquote intelligence on Iraq was fraudulent. So, very relevant guest. Welcome back, Ray McGovern.
Thank you very much.
Of course.
Katie, and thank you for your presentation, Assal. I really learned a lot, and I think Americans need to know the kinds of things that you pointed out, especially with respect to the media.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And let's see, I just want to say, I want to just read one super chat because, okay, keep up the non-biased, zero personal attacks, forward, honest reporting, Katie. You're reaching people who just want respectful society, equal treatment. Texas Grown. But I'm reading that. Thank you so much, Texas Grown, for that very generous super chat and very generous comment. But I'm also reading that because I think it really applies to both of you, that you also do that. So I want to play a clip. This is from, I think, maybe 2016. When is this from? It's a clip of Marco Rubio. Yeah, it is 2016 at the Republican Jewish Coalition Presidential Forum. And let's take a listen to what he has to say about Iran.
Collective action. What you're seeing in the Middle East now is an example of it. We have not spent enough time describing to the American people the true nature of ISIS. And our next Secretary of State needs to be someone that understands it. ISIS has a monthly publication. It's called Dabiq, D-A-B-I-Q. It's an online publication. I don't encourage you to subscribe because then people might wonder about you. But Dabiq is not some name they pulled out of a hat. Dabiq is the name of a village, of a small city in Syria. And the reason why they named it after that city is because according to their interpretation of prophecy, they believe that there is going to be a final apocalyptic showdown between the West and Islam in the city of Dabiq. They believe that it is their calling to trigger this apocalyptic showdown. And therefore, when they recruit fighters, what they are recruiting them for is to be a part of this army that is going to trigger this final showdown between the West and Islam, that Islam will win, and then the whole world will be governed under their set of rules, led by the emergence of the 12th Imam, the Mahdi, their messianic figure. Why is this important for us to understand? And why is that important for the next Secretary of State to understand? Because when you understand it, you realize these are not people you can negotiate with. These are not people that are going to go out of business. These are not individuals that are disgruntled or unemployed. These are not people that are upset because American troops were deployed in Iraq. These are individuals with an apocalyptic vision of the future, and they will not stop until they feel they have succeeded in triggering this apocalypse. It, by the way, is similar to the views held by the Ayatollah in Iran. And so when people that have an apocalyptic vision of the future are growing in their capabilities in the case of ISIS, or trying to acquire a nuclear weapon in the case of Iran, you understand why it is that in many cases diplomacy and engagement does not work, and in the case of ISIS has no chance of working. We face a very fundamental choice. Either they win or we win. There is no other possible outcome.
Okay, so there you have it. The Iranian government is like ISIS, and that's why you can't negotiate with them. There's no negotiating. I'm not sure where to start here, but it's a pretty ridiculous comparison and argument.
Okay. Well, first of all, it's ridiculous for a number of reasons, but Iran is a predominantly Shiite state. It's like 90% Shia Muslim. And ISIS hates Shia Muslims. ISIS is a Sunni extremist group. It's certainly not representative of the Muslim world in any way. It is an extremist group with an extremist ideology that actually hates Shia Muslims. And in fact, the US and Iran worked together against ISIS. So it's interesting that there would be a comparison drawn between ISIS and Iran when they're diametrically opposed. And in fact, Iran played a pivotal role, and the US and Iran, whether or not, they like to admit it, were united in this front fighting ISIS. So it's
including Soleimani, who the US then killed.
Yeah, I mean, there's articles in the Washington Post and New York Times about when the US worked with Soleimani. I mean, this is just like, it's common knowledge because they were aligned in being against ISIS. And so the comparison is extremely bizarre.
Yeah. And it's, oh wait, this I have to read. Even though someone just said no personal attacks, Telperman writes, Rubio reminds me of advice my late grandmother gave my aunt. Never trust a man who parts his hair just above the earlobe.
I would make.
I'm okay.
Yeah, you're good, Ray. Yeah.
I would mention one more thing that he talked about, this idea that Iran can't be negotiated with, which obviously we know is not true, because Iran did negotiate with the United States. They came to an agreement, the nuclear deal, or the JCPOA, in 2015. And not only did Iran abide by it, but the Trump administration certified the deal more than once before withdrawing from it in May of 2018, right? Between January 2017, when the first Trump administration comes into office, and May 2018, when they withdraw from it, the US certifies the deal multiple times, saying that Iran is in compliance with the deal, which is corroborated by IAEA reports. And in fact, Iran stayed in compliance with the deal a full year after the US had withdrawn from it, hoping that European states would be able to sort of make up for US sanctions, and they weren't able to. And that's, in fact, the reason why we're in the current situation where Iran's nuclear program has advanced to the extent that it has, is because of the US withdrawal from that deal that limited Iran's enrichment to 3.67%. Which is the deal that Rubio himself didn't support. And he argued that you couldn't trust or negotiate. We now know as a fact, because all of these years have passed, that that's not the case. And in fact, the country that couldn't be trusted to abide by that agreement was the US.
Right. I mean, and then I'm going to pass it to you, Ray, because you obviously have a lot more insight into this than I do. But I just have to point out that it is so rich and it's so racist that anyone can get away with comparing the Iranian government, I've said Iranian because that's what they all say, all these politicians, but the Iranian government and ISIS. It's so racist and ignorant. And it's only because people see them all as the same, right? It's like this, even though Iranians are not Arab, but they don't, there's this trope, right? Where it's this amorphous Arab, Muslim terrorist thing, basically. And everyone's interchangeable to these people. And so they feel comfortable comparing a government that is not irrational. Like the Iranian government is not irrational. They feel comfortable comparing them to a fundamentalist, violent, disgusting, theocratic, murderous organization. But
yeah, I just have to tell you that I don't take Rubio seriously. The Russians have an expression on neseriosny человек. He's not a serious person. Back then, he's talking about Iran wanting a nuclear weapon, trying to get a nuclear weapon. That's the one thing the intelligence community stayed steadfast on since 2007, for God's sake, up until March. They're not working on a nuclear weapon. There's a fatwa against it. They might work on it now, I suppose, but not anymore. I mean, anyhow, my father didn't do a lot of cursing, but he would call that person a fathead. The part over there, well, that's part of it, but he was a fathead. And because he went to a fancy school and because he can speak. Here's the most recent thing about Rubio. 2 weeks ago, he's on Face of the Nation. And Margaret Brennan, of all people, says, now, Secretary of State Rubio, the intelligence community says that Iran's not working on a nuclear weapon. How do you, he said, that's irrelevant. That doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Hello, So,
right. Why is the entire justification for war relevant?
Yeah, well, that's it. And there's a lot more can be said about Rubio, but the less the better. I mean, there are all kinds of people like that. Back during Vietnam, they were called the best and the brightest because they were well-heeled and they went to the best schools. And look what the hell they got us into, all right? And they're still around and they're still bowed and kowtowed to. And listen to her. Now, Margaret Brennan may be a little sign of hope here. She's not known for asking hard questions to people like Rubio, but she started to do that. I love to say that, nevertheless, she persisted. And she did. And she made a fool out of me. That's the clown that he is. So maybe that's a really little glimmer of hope. I have this principle that I like to invoke in such situations, and that is the Noah principle. No more awards for predicting rain, awards only for building arks. Now it's been raining like hell. Assal has explained what a tough nut the media is to crack. What are we going to do about it? Okay. What kind of arcs are we going to build? Margaret Brennan, maybe she's coming around, but her producers and her uppers will certainly flatten her if she goes way out of line. So what do we do? That's the problem. Now, my Veterans for Peace colleagues decided we needed to do more than rhetoric. That's why they went on a 40-day fast before the U.S. mission to the UN. That's why, in breaking that fast, they spilled blood on that building and to memorialize the baby's blood that's been spilled and the babies who have been starved. They've been arrested, but they said we got to do more than just rhetoric. So I ask every American, and perhaps you, Assal, you can join me here. I mean, we know we have the opportunity to find out what's going on. If we don't, we're not real Americans. The 4th of July is coming up. let's be real Americans, figure out what's going on, and then do something, like those forefathers. I mean, they were up against great odds, but they did something. And, pardon my plea here, but we have to start building arcs and not limit ourselves to predicting rain. There's lots of rain around.
Mm. Well, that I here to arcs. Assal, I know you've been extremely generous with your time, and we always love having you on. Do you have anything you want to say before you leave us?
No. I mean, again, as always, thank you for having this platform and for inviting me. And it was a pleasure to share the space, even if briefly, with Ray. So I'm just happy to be here. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, and definitely come back on.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Assal. Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much for joining, Ray. I have to bring up this clip because we were just showing a clip from Rubio, where he.
It's not another one. It's not another one for Rubio.
Oh, no,
okay.
don't worry.
Right.
Don't worry. No more Rubio. No more Rubio. But he was talking about, these people, right? Basically describing all Muslims as this monolith who are apocalyptic and not reasonable, and you can't negotiate with them. And I realized, there's another group of people who, unlike, I would say, the Iranian government, which does not strike me as apocalyptic, there are some apocalyptic people, including Christian Zionists, of which Marco Rubio is one. Brad, do you have that video that I sent yet, or do you want me to play it from my screen? No, you got it. Okay, so this video is a really exciting news story. It's from January of this year, and I found it on CBN, Christian Broadcasting Network. So
3 years ago, the arrival of 5 red heifers in Israel attracted global attention. Well, today, those cows are in ancient Shiloh. CBN's Chris Mitchell explains the significance of this historic event.
Here in Shiloh, first time after 2,000 years, we have real kosher red heifers, which is really exciting.
Mariah Shapir is the manager of the visitor center at ancient Shiloh and explains why the red heifers are so important.
In the Bible, it says when a person wants to enter the temple, which is called the house of life, he has to go through a process using ashes of the red heifer.
All right, that's not a happy ending for the heifer. But I just got to say, obviously, this woman speaking right now, she's not a Christian Zionist. She's a Jewish Zionist. But this is being broadcast on the Christian Broadcasting Network, which is a very Christian Zionist network. Okay.
Meaning that the red heifers are actually the key to the temple.
Shapira says that process is for purification, to cleanse someone from death.
So a person that got in contact with death, either in a funeral or in a hospital, and he wants to enter the temple, which is called the house of life, full of the presence of God, has to go through this process. And the process is the priest used to take the ashes of the red heifer, mix it with water that comes from a spring, life water. He's actually taking the source of death, mixing it with source of life, and these together become the purifying water.
Jewish tradition maintains that the red heifer ashes are needed to rebuild the third temple. Some Christians believe a third temple would pave the way for the end times. Even Hamas reportedly blamed the red heifers in part for their invasion on October 7th, because the Al-Aqsa Mosque would be in danger if the heifers were used to build a third temple. The animals are also mentioned in the book of Numbers, chapter 19. Then the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, "This is the statute of the law which the Lord has commanded, saying, Speak to the sons of Israel, that they bring you an unblemished red heifer, in which there is no defect, and on which a yoke has never been mounted. And you shall give it to Eleazar the priest, and it shall be brought outside the camp and be slaughtered in his presence."
All right. Well, very disturbing news for those cows. But anyway, just an example of how I don't think Marco Rubio would criticize Christian or Jewish Zionists for being apocalyptic.
Well, Katie, those red heifers, I think, are red herring. There are all kinds of things wrong with the biblical traditions that are adduced here. I happen to know a little bit about theology. I have a certificate in theological studies. What really bothers me is what I witnessed in person with a delegation going through the West Bank, okay? Now, we were going to visit a pristine, pure settlement on the top of this beautiful hill. And as we went up, we passed a dirt-poor Palestinian village with a water pump, no running water, okay? And we went up, and just a half a mile up, pristine, pure lawns being watered with sprinklers and all kinds of luxury around. And we were entertained, we were actually taught by this rabbi who happened to be from Cleveland, okay? Now, a friend of mine said, now, Rabbi, it's a beautiful place up here, but how do you explain the village down there that we just came at? Those people are dirt poverty. And he said, it's in the Bible. God promised this land to us, okay? Deuteronomy 15:4, you shall have this land with milk and honey. And so I raised my hand. There's very little about Hebrew scriptures that I could quote, but I knew Deuteronomy 15:4. I said, why did you read only the first part of that Deuteronomy 15:4, Rabbi? He said, what do you mean? I said, read the whole thing. We had the Bible right there, so. Okay, I'll read you what the words are. The Lord your God is giving you to possess as your inheritance. He will richly bless you so that there will be no poor among you. Be careful to follow all these commands that I am giving you today so that there will be no poor among you, period, end quote. So, in the deal, in the Bronx, we would say it's a deal, right? It's a deal, right? You could call it a covenant if you want to be fancy. I mean, hello, it was this for this. Now, how about those poor people at the bottom of the hill? Well, we went at it for a while, and then the mayor from Cleveland, the previous guy from Cleveland, who's now the head of the settlement, invited us to leave. We did leave. But my God, what kind of distorted view of what Yahweh really cares about? I happen to know a little bit about that, okay? And Yahweh really cares about what Jesus cared about, and that's why they killed him. He cares about the widow, the orphan, the refugee. Look at it, right? And even the prophet, for God's sake. Why is Hamas so damn popular? Why did they win hands down when there was an election back in 2006? Because they took care of the poor. They took care of the people who were disenfranchised, the widow and the orphan, and they won hands down. So this is a common strain, justice. One little last thing that I think people might be interested in. The pre-Aramaic biblical word for justice, it's tzedkah, okay? It denotes, in other words, the definition for justice in the pre-Aramaic word was tzedkah. It meant showing mercy to the poor. Whoa! So we have this lady. She's blindfolded, right? So she can't show partiality and all. Well, that's very nice for American justice, but biblical justice is biased and prejudiced to the core in favor of the dispossessed, the widow, the orphan, and the refugee. And what we just had signed in a bill today by this newbie Catholic, for God's sake, the vice president. I mean, what? I mean, God. There is a Catholic tradition of social justice messages. And
the Catholic worker, right? Dorothy.
Yeah, the Catholic worker. And the whole thing about justice is, you give preferential treatment to the poor. It's the same. Tzedkah. It's preferential. There's no doubt about it. Right? So the Catholic bishops back in I know this really well because I was teaching religion in the Sunday school, 1984. That was when we had good bishops appointed by John the 23rd, right? And they issued this pastoral statement, which is a pretty weighty thing, okay? And it said, look, we talk about the preferential option for the poor. We're going to tell you what it is. This is what it is. No one is entitled to amass still more of what he or she doesn't need when others are deprived of the bare necessities of life. That's the preferential option for the poor That's what we are supposed to believe. Now, was that preached from the pulpits? Very rarely. Why? Because the collection plates, they're very, very bare when you tell wealthy people that they should share more of their possessions with the poor. So if I'm a little out of sorts here, it's because the newbie Catholic J.D. Vance was responsible for casting the vote today in the Senate, saying, look, we're going to pass this literally God-damned budget. It's biblically damned because it gives preference to the rich. And that's our whole tradition. And it's not Catholic only. It's biblical Hebrew. It's Old Testament, as we used to call the Hebrew scriptures, Christian scriptures. And you'll find it in the Quran if you look closely enough. And Hamas, as I say, is very popular because it heeds that injunction and seeks justice for not only the children, but the widows, the orphans, and the refugees. And in our country, what is happening to the refugee? Well, let me go on any further, but there are certain verities here that have been dismissed. And the worst one, of course, is that God is a real estate agent.
Right.
And he ordained in the Bible that the Israelis should have domain not only over this territory, but over the people who live there. And they can neglect the needs of those people because they are chosen, right? Well, let me not go on any further on this.
No, but it is. I mean, it's just funny because Iran is called, a lot of critics of Iran will call it a theocracy. And, Israel is like outshines Iran in that area. And also Israel, I didn't know this until I had on Mohammed Morandi, but it's required in Iran, there has to be a Jewish member of parliament, which is why I may be moving there. So, because that's probably the greatest shot I have at becoming an MP, is where there's a requirement. So,
wow, yeah, you might make it there.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, no, you might make it here too. If you change your ways,
right?
Yeah, Katie, maybe I was thinking about what I might say tonight, and on October 7th in the evening, a close relative of mine, a woman very well educated, has a bunch of children, not a lot of time to pay attention, says, Dad, could you tell me real succinct, like, what just happened? What's happening in Israel? And so I said, I can tell you, but not real succinct, like. So I kept it down to 2 pages, okay? I wrote it as a letter. And, lots of things. Maybe I was remembering the justification for Israel. And this is what I said. I was 9 years old in 1948. Oh, okay. There was huge, huge celebrations in the Bronx, New York City, because a people without any land finally found a land without any people. There were parades up and down the Grand Concourse. It was, it was a great day because we all knew what the British, what the Jews had suffered during World War II. Okay, now nobody told me until decades later that wasn't a land without people. That was a land with 750,000 displaced people by moving the Israelis, what became the country of Israel, in. So, this is something that I thought that this young lady should know, and she didn't know it, but now she does. So this is the kind of education that I think that you and others should be thankful for in sort of spreading the word, so that when people kind of know all this rain that's going around, they can start building some arcs and figure out how we can right this wrong, how we can become a justice people again. And it's up to us, Katie. What is the Bishop of Los Angeles said, the Catholic Bishop of Los Angeles, about what's going on in Los Angeles? Do you know?
Mm-mm.
I don't know either. I think it's nothing. What's the Pope said?
Oh.
What's the Pope said about Israel's attack on Iran? Well, this happened before, and I was alive during those days. I was alive for all of World War II. I learned later that Pius XII couldn't find his voice. The Lutheran leaders of the church, they couldn't find their voice. And what do we get? Genocide. You know, who was it? Albert Camus, whom I admire greatly, was asked by a bunch of progressive Dominican friars in a place called Freiburg in Germany to come in and tell them what he thought about the church's position during World War II. And he was brutally frank, as Camus would be. He said, look, you know that I'm an unbeliever. I kept waiting desperately for a word from Rome. And you're surprised. Me, an unbeliever,
Right.
waiting desperately for a word from Rome? Yes, and it never came. And then later, I was told that it did come. It came in the form of an encyclical. And so I said, what, pray tell, is a encyclical? And then they explained the very form mysteriously. Well, if this was important, how come I, Albert, and others didn't know about this encyclical? Look, the church, to be a moral authority, needs to speak out so clearly that the most common peasant can understand what's right and what's wrong. And you blew it, he said. I forget the French for you blew it, but he was very, very candid, okay? Now, it's happening again, for God's sake. And, you know, I'm old enough to remember the first time. I said to myself when I learned all this stuff as a teen, I said, if that happens again, or when I get big, I'm too little now, but when I get big, I'm going to stop that. Well, now I'm big. I'm doing everything I can in every talk, even when I talked in Russia about a completely different thing. I said, please, let me say a couple paragraphs about what's going on, genocide, okay? So now I'm big, now we're all big, and we need to be informed, and your program and others are good ways to inform people, but we can't stop, we can't stop with bemoaning the rain. We gotta find ways to get at the mainstream media and give our fellow citizens a fair chance to find out what's really going on. That's a big, big challenge. I don't know how to do it. I've been trying now for 20 years, but you're making a big dent in it. But we all have to try harder.
You're always on. You're on these really important. It's really interesting. We can talk about this later, but it's interesting to see Judge Napolitano, who obviously I disagree with him on lots of things, but then I really do agree with him on some things. And it is an interesting time, and politics does make for strange bedfellows. But you're always great when you appear on his show, which you do frequently. You're a weekly guest, I believe, right?
Yes, Monday at 10, and on Friday afternoon, I go on with Larry Johnson. We have a little community roundtable, and that seems to be the most popular one. But yeah, 2 chances. Now, let me just say that the judge has 610,000 subscribers.
Yeah, wow.
And when I go abroad, people say, "Oh, I saw you, Judge." And in Russia, they watch this. Okay, so things are changing, but not fast enough for me. I'm 85 years old. I don't have too many years left. We got to push now. Actually, it's pretty dangerous now, given all that's happening in Iran and so forth. So.
Well, I actually want to ask you about Iran, and I want to show a clip of Trump on Fox News Sunday morning talking with Maria Bartiromo about the breakdown in talks between Iran and the U.S. And I want to get your reaction to this.
Mr. President, you were just coming off of one of the most consequential weeks anybody has ever seen, from striking Iran to going to NATO, to announcing 2 deals, and then this Supreme Court victory. Have you been able to digest what has occurred in the last 7 days?
Not really. It was a pretty wild period of time. And I really think in 6 months, we've taken the country and turned it around. I was told by the King of Saudi Arabia, by the leader of Qatar and the leader of UAE, when we went over there, we brought back $5.1 trillion investment into the United States. They said, you're presiding now over the hottest country in the world. And a year ago, we thought your country was dead. It could never come back. It was so incompetently run by a very bad president. And I said, you're right. This country is hot. And that was a couple of months ago. Now we're talking about what we've done recently. So the country is really going. The numbers are great. I watch you in the mornings, and you're giving those numbers, and they're really good. No inflation. We have a bad Fed chairman, but other than that, we have, great. It doesn't even matter. The numbers are so good. It doesn't matter that he keeps the rates artificially high. But it's been an amazing period of time.
When you went to the Middle East and you strengthened those relationships with all of those countries you just mentioned, did you have an idea that you would have to do something with regard to Iran? Because you teased it a little. You said, look, they've got to come to the table and talk. Something's going to happen.
Well, it was getting a little bit hot, and we knew they had a lot of sites, probably 3 plus the 1. But they had 3 main sites, and we knew they're going to have to either give them up. And I thought we could do it during negotiation, and we just about had it done. And then they said, we want enrichment. Enrichment doesn't mean like air conditioning, and it doesn't mean to jack up your car. Enrichment is a bad word. And I said, you got so much oil, what do you need that for? And they said, well, we need it. And I wouldn't let that happen. I think people wouldn't have understood it if I allowed that to happen. So we had a 60-day talk, and that delayed them a lot. And then we said, let's go at it. And it just worked out. And we wanted to work out also for Iran.
Okay, so we're going to play a little bit more, but I realize I have to pause it because I would like to go back to that, but we're going to get a copyright infringement. I forgot to keep that in mind. Can we go back to that clip now, though, Brad? Because I just want to play what he says about Iran.
Beaten up, and so was Israel. In all fairness, they were both very tight. We call it the 12-day war. That was an intensive war. But the thing that I wanted to do, and I've said it on your show, if you look back 30 years ago or 25 years, we've been doing your show a long time, and nobody like you. But you look back at the early interviews, I would say Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. They've wanted this for years, and they were weeks away from getting it. And those pilots went in there with those beautiful planes and the most sophisticated bombs anywhere in the world. Think of it, they can go 30 stories deep into granite. Who would think that's even possible?
Katie, I just wanted to mention, both to interject to break up the video clip, but also when you said that, if we had more time, I wish we could have juxtaposed this with that montage of Netanyahu for the last 30 years saying that Iran was weeks away from having a bomb. Like, he's literally parroting that Netanyahu BS.
Right, yeah. By the way, I don't know, no, 100%, but also there was a time code. I don't know when it got added. It was 120 to 328. So I don't know if we've already played through that, but apologies if that.
Yeah, that would be my bad then.
Oh, okay.
Sorry everyone.
No, okay.
We would have about 25 seconds left if you want to keep going.
Sure. Do you mind?
Yep.
And then yeah, great. Okay. Thank you.
And they did obliterate it, it turned out. Then we had to suffer the fake news with the fake news and CNN and the most sophisticated bombs anywhere in the world. Think of it, they can go 30 stories deep into granite. Who would think that's even possible? And they did obliterate it, it turned out. Then we had to suffer the fake news with the fake news and CNN and the New York Times was saying, well, maybe it wasn't as good as Trump said. Maybe it wasn't totally obliterated, but it was destroyed, but not just horrible. And I could see it happening. And they tried to build that into a story. And then it turned out, no, it was obliterated like nobody's ever seen before.
Okay. So a lot to unpack. But what are your thoughts on this war? Who do you think planned it? Do you think the U.S. was involved in planning it? Based on the timeline, the evolution of the talks?
Yeah, let me just say a little bit about obliterate, okay? Comes from the Latin word literare, has nothing to do with literature. It means to wipe out. It means to erase, okay? Adding force, okay? So that's what he said from the outset. It wasn't true. So he's going to say it 5 more times, and it still won't be true. And the intelligence community, at least the Defense Intelligence Agency, came up with a very preliminary but very telling things. No, they weren't obliterated. And even they weren't obliterated. And even the head of the IAEA, that clown whose name is Grossi, and who is in the pocket of the West, even he said, we don't even know where that highly enriched uranium is. Maybe we destroyed some of it. Maybe it was it's a clown show, okay? Now, the big thing is they're pushing against an open door. Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. Well, the intelligence community said that they weren't working on them. They started saying that in 2007, saying back at the end of 2003, Iran stopped working on a nuclear weapon and that there was a fatwa, a religious edict. Don't work on a nuclear weapon. That still obtains till today, or at least till last week, okay? Now, fatwa, people say, oh, what the fatwa? Well, I'll tell you, people come out of a Christian or a Catholic tradition, you know, encyclical. Oh, it's an encyclical. Encyclical, right? Yeah, we're supposed to share our money with the poor. Give me a break, okay? Well, the fatwa is different. So it's hard to wrap your mind around. A fatwa is taken seriously in Islam, okay? So will they change? I don't know. Are they being provoked to change? You bet that. You bet you're sweet. Yeah, they are. Now, why? The most recent thing is the president of Israel. What's his name?
Netanyahu?
Israel. No.
Herzog. Isaac Herzog.
Yeah, actually, well, yeah. The top guy has said, look, you know, it doesn't matter what Trump said about him telling us not to assassinate the supreme leader. We tried our damnedest. We thought we had him, but damn, he escaped. But we'll get him next time for sure, you know. And then I mean, did you see that in the New York Times? No, but it's right there. It's right there. Okay, so here we have the Israelis. You know, I thought I would never be surprised, but the Israelis chutzpah. But here's the Israeli president saying, no. We want to get him. We thought we had him. We got the others, but we'll get him next time. Well, now, what's he trying to do? He's trying to provoke the Iranians. Okay, what could be more provocation than knowing that they were trying to kill their supreme leader? And I was on Al Jazeera today. I try to go on Al Jazeera because I think some of the Iranians listen to Al Jazeera. And I said, you know, they tried to provoke Trump into doing more in Ukraine. He's a cool, calm, and collected customer, and he's winning. So I would draw an analogy here with the leaders in Iran. With all due respect, they need no advice from me, but if they remain calm, cool, and collected, they are winning, okay? They don't need to provoke or to respond to this provocation. You know, actually, they've issued a fatwa against the president of Israel now, and Trump and Netanyahu as well. But that doesn't matter. Just don't rise to the bait, I said. And I think that their equities, and you asked, you know, how it all came out. The way I put it together is that we always thought that the Israelis would try to mousetrap Trump into a war against Iran. Now, we thought that since Iran has these supersonic or hypersonic missiles and they have a military that just won't quit, that the Israelis are smart enough to realize that, and therefore they won't start a war with Iran because they can't really depend on the U.S. coming to its aid. Well, we were wrong in that supposition, but we were right in terms of what the Iranians have in terms of retaliation. So what I think happened was on the 12th in the evening when the Israelis started, some of the neocons in Trump's entourage took them down to the situation room, right? And they say, oh, we got something special TV for you, mister. Watch this. The Israelis have dominance over in the air, and look at them go through the, look at them, the rockets, all that stuff. It's the end of Iran. They're going to be, well, let's say it, obliterated, right? So Trump goes to bed Friday night, right? Or no, Thursday night. Gets up Friday night. This is excellent. I knew all about it. I know everything. Cool.
Right.
Okay. Now, 5 hours later, when the Iranians fixed their air defense that was down for 8 hours, okay, and started retaliating. And then Trump said, well, I didn't know a thing about this, and then push came to shove. The Iranians were winning. Now, who would have thought the Iranians might win? Well, we would have thought that's why we thought Israel would attack them. Well, they started winning, and that's when Trump said, okay, now, what can I do? I'll try to obliterate these nuclear sites, and then I'll say to Israel, look, you don't have to obliterate these things, and don't even think of using your nuclear weapons. We got you covered here, okay? But we need a ceasefire because you're getting destroyed. You're getting your rear end kicked. Okay, we'll have a ceasefire. Now, the ceasefire is not going to last very long, but the Iranians are in a very strong position. The more so since I think they're finally going to go to Putin and Moscow and say, okay, you offered us all that aid and we turned you down because we thought we could deal with the West. Okay, all right, would you give it to us now? Like real sophisticated AAA and air defense missiles and so forth. So I think with Russia and China also chipping in here, even though they don't have precise mutual defense treaties with Iran, they do have treaties, and they have a big stake in what happens to oil and gas coming out of that part of the world. So I think there'll be a little kind of a hiatus here until people try to figure out what to do. The bug in the ointment here, the fly in the ointment, I would say, is that Netanyahu is in deep kimchi. Okay, the old comic book says he's in trouble deep. Okay, why? Well, you know why. He's going to go to jail. He's going to go to jail if he loses his position in the government. And 2 days before he did this thing, he almost lost that position because there was almost a no confidence vote. Okay, so he's, this is a guy who will do anything to avoid going to jail with his wife. Okay, now you say, oh, come on, you're exaggerating, McGovern. Well, how about genocide?
Right.
I mean, a guy who can do genocide. And do you think he would shy away from using his nuclear weapons in extremis? Well, I can't be sure of that. And I think maybe Trump and his more sentient advisors said, look, let's get this thing knocked down. Let's get a ceasefire here. And let's make sure that Netanyahu doesn't even be tempted to pick out his nuclear weapons and even threaten, much less use them against Iran. That would be the end of a lot of stuff, including the world economy.
Huh. So you think he's kind of being almost like a peace negotiator? Like,
no, I didn't. No, you mean Trump? No, I
Yeah.
just think he saw the realities. He said his ally Israel, as he put Israel is not our ally. There's no mutual defense treaty with Israel.
Right.
And here's a little factoid for you. During the war in 1973, when the Arabs, the only time the Arabs actually did attack Israel, okay, and the Israelis finally prevailed with lots of help from us, Henry Kissinger got it into his head, and I know this personally because I was at active duty at the time, the agency. He got it into his head, hey, let's offer the Israelis a mutual defense treaty. That way, no Arab is going to even think of attacking Israel again like they just did. And so they did. They broached that to the Israelis. And you know what the reaction was? And a friend of mine was involved in these feelers, okay? The reaction was, oh, isn't that sweet? Oh, thank you so much, but thanks, but no thanks. We don't need a mutual defense treaty, okay? Well, why could that be? Why could that be, Katie? Well, number one, a treaty requires internationally agreed upon borders. Israelis didn't want any part of that. It also requires that each party, if they're going to take off after where their neighbor, Israeli going to take off to Syria or Iraq, it's supposed to be by your leave. You're supposed to tell your treaty partner what you're going to do. And the Israelis really love to ask for forgiveness after and not asked for permission before. So, and then there, at the same time, when this was turned down by the Israelis, there was this little joke in Washington. It's not really a joke because it sort of reflects reality. And somebody said, "Hey, let's make Israel the 51st state." And then the reaction,
yeah,
yeah, you know the answer to that, right?
No, what?
No. Why? That's terrible. The lobby didn't want that, and the answer was, then we would only have 2 senators.
Oh, right, yeah, that is.
So anyway, there's no defense pact. It's just this kind of indoctrination, this weird defense of Netanyahu by the president in one of his social media things. Just yesterday, was it the day before? The guy's deranged, and that's important. I mean, no one can count on what Trump's going to do. That's why the Russians are being really, really careful, okay? They see an opportunity here, depending on which way Trump goes. He seems to be getting the hell out of Europe. There was no mention in the NATO communique saying that Ukraine has a, what's the word, irreversible right to join NATO. Whoa, that was the big deal last time, just 1 year ago.
Right.
Ukraine was mentioned about 36 times last year in the communique. How many times this year? 3 times. So he's getting out of Ukraine, and Putin doesn't want to risk that. So he's treating him with
kid gloves.
Very gingerly. Yeah, kid gloves is the word. And he hopes that this is the last chance that somebody better than Biden, can you believe better than Biden? Well, yeah, easy. That's easy. But at least they're talking to each other. And that's the only good news I can impart. The difference between Biden and this crowd is there are active contacts. And when Putin calls up Trump answers the phone. And the same is when Lavrov calls Rubio. And that happened, of course, several times just over the last several weeks.
So I actually want to ask you more about Russia and Ukraine. So what is the latest that is happening there? What do you think people need to know about what's happening? And also want to ask you about Trump's latest interesting interactions with NATO and his daddy comments. Okay, if you're watching this live, you are in luck because you get the whole thing. If you're watching this later and you want to see the full interview with Ray McGovern, which I know that you do, he has great stories. You can do that at patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. Again, that is patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. And everyone have a great night. And I will see you next week. I will be in London. Give me a shout out, anyone who's in London. I don't know what I mean by that. That's kind of weird. I don't have enough time to do any gigs there. I gotta plan ahead next time. Brad, we'll go back to London and we'll do combined filming and gigs. But we're going to do some more interviews for our documentary on Holocaust survivors and their descendants speaking out against the genocide. So I will see you all next week, either live or I will play a fascinating pre-tape. I don't want to give away who the guests are yet, but I think I have a lead on on 2 people, and you guys are really going to like them. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Brad. Thank you, Nate. Thank you, Phantomus Fanta. And see you next week. Bye, everyone.
Okay, I'm down.